Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today here at Stambaugh Ness. I'm Tom Moul. I'm our Director of Strategic Tax Advisory Services at Stambaugh Ness, and we really appreciate you all joining us on some pretty late notice here today. As you all may know, we had planned to start our town hall sessions next Wednesday, March 25th, but things are just moving so rapidly with the COVID-19 situation and how our regulators are responding to that. We know that you all have lots and lots of questions. So we pulled this off, really a decision we made just this morning. So a huge shout out to our IT team, Michael Pabon and Rennie Rivas, for making this happen, and also to our marketing team led by Heather Zecker, who did some yeoman's work here this morning to make this happen. So again, we welcome you all to this event. The format we're going to go through today, as you can see, we are all working from our homes, working remotely, just like I'm sure many of you are. This is the first time we've done a live event like this, so I hope you'll bear with us if we have a technical glitch or so, but I'm sure we won't. I'm sure our IT team has us in good shape. We have scheduled this session for an hour. However, we want to answer all of the questions you have. So the format we're going to have is a few of us, who I'm going to introduce here in a second, are going to give some comments on our specific areas of expertise, go through a couple of things that may answer some of your questions immediately. But if not, we are then going to open it up for questions, and we are willing to stay on the line as long as that takes to answer them. If that's less than an hour, fine. But certainly if it goes beyond an hour, we are going to be here. We want to get you as much information as we can. Now, I will tell you, we certainly don't have all the answers. Things are changing as we speak. But we will certainly take all of your questions, and if we don't know the answer, we'll let you know that, and we'll do our best to get you the answer and get back to you. So with that being said, the format for submitting your questions is you can type them on the screen. I believe it's going to ask you for your name and email address, and that's if we need to get back in touch with you with something that we don't know the answer to today. So I'd like to introduce my fellow presenters here today, and then we'll get started. So again, my role here is Strategic Tax Advisory Services at Stambaugh Ness. So my role today is going to be talking to you about some regulatory and tax issues and what's going on with that. We have Kristi Weierbach, who is our Director of Workforce Advisory Services. And I think Kristi's got some messages that you're all going to be very interested in around what's going on in the workforce, unemployment, paid leave, health insurance, and all those type of comments. Chad Bumbaugh, our Director of Entrepreneurial Services Group, is going to talk to you about some concerns you may have with cash flow, where there may be some funds available. Also, a couple of other things to be looking out for as you try to carry on your businesses as best you can, obviously in these unprecedented times. Phil Keeney, our Director of IT Services, is then going to jump on, and Phil's going to talk to you about, all those things you should be concerned about in these times now with your workforce working remotely, people tapping into your systems in a different manner maybe than they ever have before. And last but not least, Katie Botniak, who is our Chief People and Culture Officer here at Stambaugh Ness, is going to talk to you about some of the things that your employees may have concerns about, how you may be able to help them out, and also just some of the things that we've learned at Stambaugh Ness about how to and how not to conduct a remote workforce environment. As many of you know, a large majority of our folks at Stambaugh Ness have been working remotely for quite some time. So we do have a little bit of experience in how all this works, and Katie's going to share some of that. After our remarks, we will then open it up, as I said, to a question and answer session, and we will all do our best to answer those your concerns as best as we can. So with that, we're going to get it started. Kristi's going to lead it off. So Kristi, it's all yours.
So I know this is an exhausting time for everybody right now as you're trying to keep pace with all the changes and all of the events that certainly have been many unexpected things that we've had to adjust and accommodate for. So as Tom had mentioned, there's going to be a few key things that I touch on today that I am going to do the best to answer, hopefully in advance, many of your questions. Certainly, if I don't have the answer, I'm going to stay out in front of this until we can get that clarity for you. So the items I'm going to talk through are unemployment, health insurance, and paid sick leave. So with regards to unemployment, a lot of you might be in a position where you say, hey, we had to close our doors and we don't have the ability for people to work remotely. So for those that can work remotely, I encourage you to continue to allow them to work if there's work available that can be done. Certainly it's a good time maybe to start on some of those projects that you've been meeting to get around to. But for those people that truly can't work from home and you don't have the ability to maybe sustain paying them, I encourage you to have all your employees in that position file a claim for unemployment. Get them to open the claim. Maybe they won't need it, but at least get it active and get in the pipeline in the event that they truly do need to rely on that to get them through this pandemic. So one of the questions that we have been receiving a lot of inquiries about is, well, we saw the guidance from the IRS that we are required to pay the emergency sick pay. Do we have to begin doing that immediately? The answer is no. Based on our interpretation of the rules, the curveball that we received here in Pennsylvania, and that some of you may experience in other states, at this time, that rule only goes into effect April 2nd. So essentially, there's almost 2 weeks between now and then, where hopefully we'll get more guidance on what that looks like. But in the moment, I would just encourage your employees to go out and file for unemployment. There are some companies who have decided to take the next 2 weeks and just pay their employees as if they're working. That's your choice as an organization. Nobody's telling you have to do that. And it really comes down to financially, can you afford to do that? So I would encourage you to give that a lot of thought. Even if you do continue to pay employees, have them open up that claim. That way, if this extends longer than we hope it does, then we would, or they would be in a good position to be able to get the compensation faster than waiting to open a claim. So this impact will not affect your experience rating, especially if it's as a result of the COVID-19. I'm not exactly sure yet how that communication or that link occurs between what the employee submits and what the employer is expected to respond and how they essentially align that. But what I believe might happen is that the employee is going to submit saying, I'm laid off, lack of work, reduced hours, and then you'll get an inquiry as the employer to fill out, why did this happen? That'll be your opportunity then to say, hey, this is related to COVID-19. So make sure that you are responding to those requests very timely, because I don't want this to negatively impact your experience rating, which would be in effect for multiple years from here forward. So just a friendly reminder, this compensation would be taxable to employees, so they need to be mindful of that. They should be checking off that box when they're submitting their initial claim to make sure that they are having taxes withheld. That way, when they get to the end of the year, they're not in a bad position because they had income that they didn't pay taxes on. So now the next question that we've been receiving a lot of inquiries about is related to health insurance. So what do? I laid off my employee. Do I need to transition them to COBRA? What does that look like? So a lot of times carriers will say, hey, when you have a reduction of hours, let us know. It's a trigger event. Employee has to go on COBRA. So reached out into our network of brokers, and looks like the carriers are going to be a little kind or forgiving in this transition period. So if you laid somebody off today as a result of the announcement last night, I wouldn't cancel their insurance effective the end of March. Let it continue through to April. As we get into the first couple of weeks, I think we'll have maybe a better idea of when people can come back to work. So with that being said, it's your choice as the employer. Do I want to allow that employee to pay me back over a certain period of time? Or am I, as the employer, just going to pay on behalf of the employee and forgive those normal deductions that they would be having withheld out of their paycheck? Again, that's your choice. It's not right, wrong, or indifferent, but just communicate to your employees that their coverage is not going to discontinue and that you're going to possibly have to pull those deductions from them in future paychecks, and maybe you span it over a couple paychecks. So again, it's not clear cut. It's just something that you as an organization will have to decide what makes most sense for you and your employees at this point in time. So right now, COVID-19 testing is free. It should not be an additional expense for your employees. So if something does happen where they receive a bill, then I would work with your insurance broker to resubmit that because maybe the wrong medical code was selected when that claim had gone through. So the last item I'm going to talk on here is about paid sick leave. There's a few pieces of this that Tom will then speak to as well as it relates to the payroll tax credit that's potentially available to all of you. So again, the emergency paid sick leave was approved at the federal level. It is something that goes into effect April 2nd, where you as an organization might have an obligation to pay up to 80 hours for each employee for them to attend to issues surrounding the COVID-19. So that could be that they themselves become ill, they have to take care of maybe a child or a loved one who has come down with the COVID-19 virus, or maybe they just can't work because their childcare closed, schools closed, etc. So we have to be careful as to, why are they off, and making sure that it aligns with why they need to be paid and so forth. And the one thing that's still a little unclear that we will try to get clarity for all of you is, what does it mean by isolation? So now that Governor Wolf says, hey, all non-life sustaining businesses have to shut down, does that now mean that that isolation is in effect, or it's a quarantine? So the definition of that, still a little gray, and we hope that in the coming days we'll get more clarification about the differences between federal and state and what that means to all of you. So this rule does apply to companies with less than 500 employees. You have more than 500. This does not apply to you at this time. There is potentially a hardship exemption for companies that have less than 50 employees. At this time, we're not quite sure what that process looks like to be able to apply for a hardship. Again, my hope is that by day 7, after the rule was passed, that we'll have that clarity, because that's when the government had said that they would send out notices to employers about postings that will need to be provided to employees and so forth. So there are maximums, so it's not like an open pocket for you and your organization, and it depends on the type of the scenario. So again, we'll just continue to provide you additional information as more becomes available. That way we have the clarity as to what the expectation is for us as companies. One important thing that I think you should start doing today is that if an employee is off of work for any period of time where you're paying them, maybe it's a couple hours here or there, etc., track that as a separate project number in your system or a separate earning code. That way you know for sure how much money you outlaid as a company related to the COVID-19 virus. So that way then you're in a good position to support any payroll tax credit that you look to take in the future. And again, Tom's going to talk a little bit more about that when I hand the wand over to him in a moment. So there are some expanded FMLA provisions as well, where, the 50 employee rule is kind of thrown out the door for this scenario related to the COVID-19, not for other medical situations and so forth. Again, this applies to the under 500 employees, and there's also potentially a hardship exemption as well. More information, as we had said, and I'm sorry if you're tired of hearing that already, but we're just doing the best that we can to share our insights with the information we have available today. So Tom, I'm going to hand it back to you so you can talk about the payroll tax credit, and certainly if I missed sharing an important piece of information, please feel free to let us know.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Kristi. And yeah, an awful lot of stuff to digest here on the tax side. And I mentioned in the intro that things are changing as we speak. Actually, one of these things changed from the time we started planning this morning until we went live for this afternoon. That's a very important one. That's the tax filing deadline. Tax day of April 15th has been moved to July 15th. Some of you may have heard earlier in the week, I think it goes back to a week ago today, last week, President Trump had announced that under the Stafford Disaster Act, they were moving any payments due on federal tax returns from April 15 to July 15. That included first quarter estimates. However, at that point, the filing deadline was not moved. A lot of the industry groups, I know our industry group, the American Institute for Certified Public Accountants, kind of jumped up and down and said, well, this isn't reasonable. People cannot get to their tax preparers. You have folks in nursing homes that are quarantined. It's going to be very difficult for people even to file extensions on April 15. And as such, they did relent today. Secretary Mnuchin announced this morning that not only are the payment dates extended to July 15 for all tax returns, that C corporations, individuals, and anyone else that's due April 15, we're now going to have to July 15, not only to file those tax returns, but to pay the taxes as well. There still remains some questions on other types of taxes. As you know, first quarter payroll taxes are due at the end of April. We don't have guidance yet if those dates are going to be extended. Most of the states and localities now kind of need to get on board with the federal. Some were very proactive, like Maryland and a few other states that said, we're going to follow whatever the federal does, and that'll be an automatic extension. Some other states are going to have to take proactive action. I just saw an email this morning from the Pennsylvania Institute of CPAs to the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue asking them to get on board and have the extension as well. So I have confidence they will. It's just not official yet. If you have any questions in the state you're in or the states that you file, please just reach out to that. We have resources that are updated almost continually as soon as the states make announcements. So we should be able to keep you up to date with whatever the latest is on that. But my guess is we're going to have an extension of tax season for all taxes for about 3 months. So in states such as Pennsylvania, New York, Illinois, California, and such, where there is a quarantine, where your movement is restricted, rest easy. That trying to get things to your tax preparer, can be a little bit relaxed. Big news, I think, that we do want to talk about that Kristi referred to is the payroll tax credit. This came out on the bill that was passed Wednesday evening. It's the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. That's a mouthful. This had originally come out of the House last week. They did some technical corrections to it, and the Senate passed it, and the president signed it Wednesday night. Kristi had talked about the provisions under the Emergency Sick Leave and the Family Medical Leave Act, where if you are an employer of under 500 and you don't get that hardship waiver because you're under 50, you may be required to pay wages for your employees. That could be up to 2 weeks of sick pay, and then additional payments for 10 additional weeks under the Family Medical Leave Act. Well, the good news is that is not going to be out of your pocket permanently. It is going to be out of your pocket short term as you make those payments, but there is a federal credit that is going to be available under this act of 100% of those payments that you make. In addition, it will also be applied against the employer's share of the Social Security tax, so that other 6.2% that's a burden on you. So when you file quarterly payroll tax returns, you will be able to take this credit against your Social Security liability. If your credit exceeds the liability, it's going to be refundable. So you are going to be out of pocket for a short term, but you will get that money back. A couple of details on the credit. The credit is capped at $511 per day for an eligible employee's wages who is being paid because of self-isolation, diagnosis or care, or a health care provider's recommendation. Now remember, $511 a day equates to about $132,000 of annual salary, so it's probably going to cover most of your folks. The credit's capped at $200 a day if the reason for the employee being off work is to care for a family member exposed to or diagnosed with the virus, or for care for a child under 18 whose school or daycare is closed. As Kristi said, a lot to shake out there as we look at what the states are imposing, with the required shutdowns versus the federal. That all needs to be reconciled. But the good news is, I think whatever you're going to pay to your employees, if you do follow this, even if you are that under 50 employer and you decide, you know, it's just in the best interest, goodwill to my employees to pay them, you will get reimbursed for that. In addition, and this goes back to Kristi's comments on how you're going to handle your healthcare plans. I don't have a lot of detail on how this works, but the credit will be increased by any amounts that are paid to maintain a group health plan, as long as those expenses are excluded from your employee's gross income, meaning you're not going to force them to repay, that you are going to bear that cost. Again, the government is going to help you to reimburse you for doing so. And also, it has to be allocable to these wages that we're talking about through the Emergency Sick Leave Act or the Medical Leave Act. So again, we want to keep everybody covered. The federal government's going to great extents to make sure people retain their health insurance, and also that the employer is made whole for that. A couple of other notes. Because you are getting a credit, you won't be able to take a deduction for those wages or taxes paid. You won't be able to, in essence, kind of double dip on that. For those of you that are self-employed and don't have wages, only paying yourself, there is going to be a similar credit available for you as well. And there may even be some advanced payments on that. More details to come. As Kristi said, the bill came out March 18th, 2 days ago. It's effective April 2nd. So we expect a lot of guidance to come through from the Department of Treasury and the IRS in that interim period. The wages paid under these acts are not considered wages for the employer's portion of Social Security, meaning anything you pay under this, you're not subject to that 6.2% employer share. And it's even increased by, you are subject to the 1.45% Medicare tax, but you're going to get a credit for that as well. So at the end of the day, these payments are free from the Social Security and the Medicare. And I guess the big question is, how do we pay for this? And is this going to impact our long-term Social Security benefits? Well, the general fund is going to reimburse the Social Security fund for this lost revenue to, again, help keep the Social Security fund somewhat afloat. So that, you know, that's always been a concern. Will those benefits be there for us upon all of our retirement? A couple of other items I wanted to touch on before I hand it off. There were some provisions that came out as regards to high deductible health insurance plans. As you know, in a high deductible plan, you are able to fund a health savings account to help you offset the cost of the deductible. But really, everything that you run into in a high deductible plan, you know, you're paying out of pocket until you hit that deductible. Well, this act does allow us, or allows any testing for and treatment of the virus to be paid for fully by insurance without the imposing of a deductible or lower than minimum deductible, without compromising the plan in any way. So that also allows you to continue contributing to your HSA. So that's a very positive as well. Last, I wanted to talk about something that I will give kind of a warning before I even get into it. This is just proposed, but some of you may have heard that the bill passed on Tuesday was round 2 of federal funding. The first round really was all about funding testing and coming up with the vaccine, the cure, and so on. The third stimulus package really is going to be the big one. We've heard numbers thrown around of like $1 trillion as a cost. Well, yesterday, Senator Sam McConnell proposed something called the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. There's provisions in this that cover the health aspects. There's some that cover funding, which Chad will talk about, but there's a lot of tax stuff in here. And the big one that you've probably all heard about so much on the news is the direct payments of checks to all Americans. What is proposed in this bill is that every individual up to a certain income level would receive $1,200. Every joint couple would get $2,400, and there would be an additional $500 per dependent child. All of that is based on how your 2018 tax filing was put together. Now, there are phase outs for that. For an individual, the benefit starts phasing out between $75,000 and $99,000 of income. On a joint return, it's between $150,000 and $198,000. So if you're over those limits, unfortunately, you won't get the credit. They're trying to get the monies out to those they feel that need it the most. This in of itself is a cost of about $100 billion is what's estimated. There are other provisions in here that would be very favorable if they pass. One would be to delay all estimated federal tax payments required in 2020 until October 15th and beyond. So our April 15, our June 15, or September 15 estimates could all be delayed until October 15 to give you use of that cash in the meantime. There is a provision that you would be able to withdraw up to $100,000 from your retirement account without penalty. Now, I say without penalty, it would still be taxable to you. But if you need that money in the short term, if you restore it, you can put that money back. Again, we need details on how that'll work, but that may help people in the short term with their cash needs. There will be a $300 above the line charitable contribution deduction. As many of you know, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that passed at the end of 2017, far fewer Americans itemize their deductions anymore and get a benefit for making charitable contributions. This would be if you're so inclined to help these causes that are going to help us through this crisis, to make some deductions and get a tax benefit for it. This is a big one. Employers and self-employed may be able to delay paying the employer's share of Social Security for a 2-year period. What's due in 2020 would not be due until 50% by December 31st of 2021, and the other 50% till December 31st of 2022. We'll have to see how that one goes. Net operating losses for corporations would be restored. Carrybacks. Right now, we can only carry losses forward for 2 years, and there's some income limitations on how much we can claim. It's proposed that any losses incurred 2018 through 2020, we would be able to fully carry them back for up to 5 years, and again, generate some immediate tax refunds. Those of you who are C corporations who are carrying forward alternative minimum tax credits, and I know that's a very confusing topic, but the alternative minimum tax went away for C corporations after 2017, but those of you that have credits, there was like a 10-year recoup period to put some cash in your pocket. They're looking to accelerate that. I don't think that's going to cover a lot of people, but if it does, another nice way to get some cash. And last but not least, if you have run into again, a new tax provision that came out in 2018, where the interest expense on your tax return is limited to 30% deductibility, 30% of income, there's a proposal to up that to 50% for 2019 and 2020. So I know I just ran through that fast. As I said, that last part, that's all proposed. However, the Senate is promising to have the vote on this no later than Monday. So I think when we reconvene again next week, we're going to have some more solid news for you on that. Just watching some of the news today, I know there's already a little bit of partisan bickering on that as to where that comes out. So I doubt it'll be in the format that was proposed, but I think there's a lot more relief coming. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chad, who will now give us some talks about cash flow and such.
All right, thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. And you know, outside of payroll and taxes, they all seem to manifest themselves in cash flow, which I think is one of the other big concerns that we're hearing a lot of questions and calls for help about right now. And outside of some of the things that Tom mentioned with the payroll and the income tax deferrals, and what I'll call the normal tips in terms of budgeting, you know, managing your AP, your AR in the business, and you know, just being smart about your dollars in terms of how you're investing them. There are a couple of things that are available that maybe folks aren't quite as familiar with or have not had to call upon in the past. One of the big ones that we're seeing changes made to is SBA loans. And what we're looking at now is up to $2 million of, you know, essentially what amounts to a working capital loan, an interest rate of 3.75% for for-profit businesses for up to 30 years. So that's not a bad cost and not a bad term for working capital. If you're not for profit, they're actually looking at a 2.75% interest rate. That's where we're at right now. Tom mentioned the CARES Act in round 3. That could potentially increase that loan amount up to $10 million and make some other changes to the SBA program, mostly to make it a little more user-friendly. Again, that's still to come and to be worked out over the weekend, and maybe Monday we'll have some definitivity to what those additional changes are. But that's at the SBA at the federal level. There are also states nationwide working on their own responses to this, much like they're working on the tax deferrals, hopefully. Pennsylvania, I believe the number is around $60 million of aid. I heard this afternoon from the governor here. And again, we have 50 states, 50 different rules and regulations that we're working through to help out with this situation. That's one of the items. The next is business interruption insurance. So if you have this buried in your policies and you've never had to use it, which hopefully most folks don't or haven't had to, it'd be a good time to look at your documentation, maybe give your broker or your agent a call and ask about, is there any relief from before shutdown, from a closure, from the coverage that we've been paying premiums for. That business interruption insurance might be able to cover at least some of the cost while we're shut down during this period. Similar to that is, on the lending side, contacting your banker, personally, maybe your mortgage lender, your credit card providers, to see what kind of assistance they provide. We're hearing a lot of things start to rumble around in this regard. Bank of America just came out and essentially said that they're going to defer mortgage payments for individuals impacted by the virus. And it kind of harkens back to 10 years ago, 12 years ago with the real estate crisis, where we had, a lot of the different programs and deferrals available just to help people keep their homes. So it seems like that's going to be available. But again, phone calls now and taking action to get those discussions underway, I think are very prudent if you're in that position. The couple other smaller items, student loan interest payments have been suspended, but what I've been reading on this is that they actually aren't reducing the payments currently. They're just putting it all to principal. So that'll help us in the long run, but it doesn't really help your monthly cash flow. My understanding also is that it's either part of the CARES Act or a separate legislation that's being tossed around, is that there's going to be a flat out deferral on those payments. I don't quite know exactly what that's going to look like. That's one that I just keep seeing bits and pieces of here. But if you have student loans, that's something to think about as well, is to just pay attention to that. So in addition to cash flows, there's a couple other questions that I've received in the last 12 to 24 hours that I wanted to chat about maybe just a little bit. One is crossing state lines. In Pennsylvania, we're currently on a non-life-sustaining business shutdown, as is California, New York, and I believe someone mentioned Illinois just got a similar order, and my gut tells me that the list is going to continue to grow. But what if I have employees that are on a job site in a state that's not currently shut down? How's that going to work? It sounds like more and more states are going to move to the shutdown mode, but right now, it's really not clear what that looks like or how that's going to play out. I think the best advice we can give right now is just be considerate of where you're sending your employees or where you're asking your employees to go. If they're going into one of the hot zones, the New York area or places like that, that may be some exposure that you're asking yourself to undertake by putting your employees in that position. So best we can give right now is use your best judgment and consideration, because there isn't a whole lot of clarity right now on that front. I guess in closing, I just want to say, to the extent that you're able to, try to stay calm. We're also looking at some more proactive and strategic opportunities that this situation provides. Digesting that tax reform and thinking about how we can use that to our benefit. And I think that's going to be some of the things we're going to hit on in future town halls. But right now, everybody's just kind of hang on and hang in there, and we'll see what the help is going to bring. So with that, I'll turn it over to Phil for some discussions on the IT front relates to this matter.
All right, thank you, Chad, Tom, and Kristi. As I'm sitting here listening, I hear a lot regarding finance and the impact on the organization in terms of, employee compensation, unemployment, etc. And that's all great and fine on the finance side. My goal here is to help you guys continue to move forward So you don't have to worry a whole lot about the finance side and continue to keep your business running and cash flow moving. May not be what it used to be, but at least you can stay, business can stay open. So of course, over the course of the past week or so, we've had, I'd say, putting out a lot of fires, if you will, for our customers as it relates to, hey, how do I get my employees to work from home? What do they need? What does security look like? So I want to sit here and walk through, our setup at Stambaugh Ness, because I think the majority of our staff, we work remote already. And as of currently, I believe almost 100% of our staff are working remote from home. Yeah, it has some impact, but I feel at least we were ahead of the curve there and had the remote capabilities in place. So it was a fairly simple transition. I know a lot of organizations, like I mentioned, are setting up workforce, remote workforce on the fly. I will tell you, as you're evaluating that, or maybe not even evaluating it, as you're in the process of doing that, I've had several clients reach out and say, hey, I need to obtain new hardware, laptops, desktops to deploy at employees' homes. I'll tell you right now, the options for obtaining or sourcing those items are scarce. I had several calls today with some of our distribution channels, and their comments are anything on the consumer side, laptops, desktops, keyboards, mice, web monitors or webcams, they're almost non-existent at this point. Hopefully, maybe you go to Walmart, Best Buy, a Costco, you can grab some off the shelf, but good luck trying to get those and install in the individual's homes, which then leads me into if the users, the employees have workstations at home, the question then comes into play, how do I secure it? How do I know what they're accessing on a daily basis, and they're going to be connecting back to the network to perform their daily duties? And it really comes down to working with your internal IT team to implement processes like multi-factor authentication, remote desktop connections, a VPN of some sort. I caution, or I beg everyone as they're going through this to not haphazardly put people in a remote capacity without continuing to have cybersecurity, the securing of your data at the forefront. It's easy for us to get in a panic at the moment and say, hey, our office is shut down, just like in Pennsylvania there. The offices are shut down and people are haphazardly just trying to set up a home connection to be able to continue to work, and they forget about the security component. So please make sure that they're tunneling through a VPN. There's multi-factor authentication in place, or there's remote desktop services or protocol in place for those organizations. Another thing too here, and I believe Katie may touch on it, now's the time to be evaluating your remote workforce policies, how those individuals or how those users are being managed, how technology is being handled. Tighten up those policies. If you don't have any, start writing them. And this is I would say, as you're going through this transition from employees in an office to now working from home, as I mentioned a little bit ago, don't make it don't view this as a short-term thing. Okay, remote capabilities are it's booming. Everybody's, I wouldn't say everybody, but the majority of the country has a remote force in some capacity. As you're going through and putting people in the remote aspect, embrace it and think of this as a new opportunity to have a different approach or maybe work differently. If again, this could be something that's short term, the COVID-19, but think of it as a long-term effect and set yourself up, provide the necessary tools for those users to be able to function at a high level and be effective when working from home. And again, think of this as a long-term effect, not short-term. One of the things that we look at as well is for organizations that are running on-premise infrastructure, take a look at this as a time to also evaluate cloud-based solutions. You know, in the event that this happens down the road or this is prolonged, there are things that cloud-based solutions allow that all it really requires is internet connection and cybersecurity protocol. So please, I am telling customers, don't panic. We're here to support them in any fashion, form or fashion that they need. Our goal is to keep the customers up and running as much as we can so they can continue to function. And I say, look at this as an opportunity. Don't panic. Look at this as a change in your environment, the way that you operate, and embrace it. My last comment I'll make here before I hand off to Katie, because I know we want to catch up with questions at the end. As you start deploying remote workforce, focus on the people side of it. And again, I may be sliding it a little bit to Katie's side there, but just like what we're doing here today, we have a process or the ability to communicate via video. Because as you start putting people in a remote workforce, you may see a drop off in engagement, if you will. Make sure that you have effective communication protocol in place. How are you going to meet with your employees on a daily basis without seeing them face to face at the office? We use Microsoft Teams. It's not the one and all. There's a bunch of other platforms out there, but those are things that organizations need to be addressing as well. Don't just say, hey, you're now going to be able to work from home. We have your laptop monitors and you have your internet connection, but you forget about that interaction, personal interaction. And that's not only with internal resources, that's also how are you going to communicate with your customers now? The communication side of it via video chat certainly allows you to have a more personal touch. So to cap it off, make sure that as you're moving employees to that remote workforce, if I can't stress anything else, I'll just stress, make sure that you continue to focus on cybersecurity. The last thing you want to do is take steps or circumvent certain steps because it's too cumbersome at the moment. Please just make sure you have a process in place. If you guys have any questions, reach out to the technical team here at Stambaugh Ness, submit a help desk ticket. You know, we'll at least try to navigate those waters with you. So go ahead, we'll hand it over to Katie.
Oh, there we go. I was muted. Sorry about that. Wanted to just say a couple of things. Just to give you a couple of statistics, at Stambaugh Ness, we're hovering around 131 employees, and of that group, 65% of us were already remote before this mandate came down. So we are fortunate to have some policies and procedures in place, but it somehow feels different now that the majority of us are working 100% remote. I know that we're going to have other sessions where we can get into some more detail, but for today, I think that the thing that I would like to focus on is just make sure you are creating structure in your day. Use your normal routine that you use every day to get ready to go to work. If you do that for yourself, you really set yourself up for success. It's very easy to roll out of bed and walk over to your computer and start working, but nothing replaces that routine that you have in the morning and to really get yourself ready for work mentally. Make sure you take breaks. It's so easy, and I need to take this advice myself, but it's so easy to spend an entire day in front of your computer and before you know it, it's 5 o'clock. So again, that's something that you would normally do when you're in the office. Also, make sure that you're setting up time to talk with the person you report to. I think it's really important for managers or supervisors to stay close to their direct reports so that they just know how they're doing. At the end of the day, one of the easiest ways to step into, all of a sudden we're now remote, is reaching out to those folks who report to you or even coworkers and simply ask, how are you doing? You don't necessarily have to have all the answers, but again, you don't feel as isolated and you don't feel as lonely. And I think we'll be talking more about these things in our other sessions, but that's something that we do now. I mean, it is something where we'll send each other a message. We use Microsoft Teams, and it gives us a chance to just send a message and pop in. Sometimes we send little funny gifts, to each other to just kind of lighten the load. These are some really interesting times, and there are some people who have higher anxiety, and if you're aware of that, go the extra mile. And we always use the term at Stambaugh Ness, meeting people where they are, and just really kind of think about the individuals and what they're going through, and again, just simply being there. That's everything I have today.
Well, thank you, Katie. Great advice, and thank you, everyone else. Lots and lots of material for everyone to digest, but there certainly are many, many considerations as we all enter kind of a new reality, a new world that we haven't been before. And we just want to emphasize that we are here to help, even if you just need someone to talk to brainstorm with. We may not have all the answers, but we certainly will do our best. And with that, I think it's time for us to go into our question and answer session. So if everyone could unmute themselves, don't know where these questions might end up. And we're going to have Michael or Rennie are going to read those questions for us, and we'll just jump in here on whoever might be most appropriate to answer. So Mike, if you would, go ahead.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and start from the very top of the list. First question we have is, how do we do payroll if we can't go to the office?
You want me to take that one?
That sounds like a Kristi question.
Yeah, this is a great time to encourage people who have live checks to go direct deposit route. As scary as it is, it's going to be the easiest solution. If you currently process payroll in-house and you don't use a third-party provider, I don't know if you can access the software remotely. So that would be a question for your technology consultant or team. And if you don't have one, that's something that Phil would definitely be able to talk with you further about. But if you use a third-party payroll provider like Paylocity or Paytime, they absolutely have the ability to continue operations remotely and seamlessly, leaning heavily on the online technology. So if you're not there and you do struggle with, how are we going to do it on QuickBooks, then reach out to us and we absolutely will have a separate conversation with you. One other point that I'd like to make is we have a client who has some live checks. Direct deposit's not an option, so we are exploring pay cards. Brink and Rapidly are two companies that offer that. Virtually no cost to employees or employers, so it might be a great solution for you as well if direct deposit is not an option for you and your employees.
All right. So next question we have here is, are we required to pay vendors, ex-partners, buyouts, etc.?
I'll go ahead and try to take that one. I think that's going to come down to the short answer is probably yes. You have a legal obligation to pay those folks, but it's certainly going to come down to cash flow as you're able. I think some of the things Chad talked about certainly are going to help with that. I think funds are going to be available a little bit more easily for you. And certainly I would suggest reaching out to your vendors, reaching out to those type of folks and talking to them and seeing if you can, negotiate some other terms. I think everyone hopefully is going to be understanding in these times.
All right, next one on this list, and I think this will kind of tie into the next one. It's can we work in Maryland? We have a Maryland license.
Chad, do you want to take that one?
Sure. At this time, to my knowledge, Maryland has not shut businesses. It seems like they're a little bit behind some states. They just shut down shopping malls and some things yesterday that most other states seem to have shut down earlier. But I did hear someone earlier, and I can't remember if it was anybody on this call or someone else, say that they heard that Maryland sounds like they are going to be issuing a shutdown order. So I think the answer is, as of today, probably. As in the next 24 to 36 hours, from what I'm understanding, is probably not in Maryland specifically. This is evolving on a state-by-state basis, hour by hour. So the best I can say is stay tuned, look at the states that you're planning to work in's websites, see what their messaging is, and also just keep your employees in mind if you're sending them into places where there are a high number of reported cases at this point. Just may not be worth it.
I'd like to add a note that, pay attention to what the enforcement looks like. So last night is when we found out that non-life sustaining businesses were to be shut down as of 8 p.m. last night, but the enforcement isn't starting until tonight at midnight. And like in San Francisco, they are issuing misdemeanors. So it is going to vary state by state. You have to identify what level of risk am I willing to assume. So I encourage you to look at the enforcement and how it relates to you and your industry. Tom, I'm sorry if I cut you off there.
You said that better than I could have, Kristi. Yeah. Thanks.
All right, so moving on to the next question, and we had a request to try to switch the video to who's answering, so I'm going to try to accommodate as it goes on if I see who's answering. The next question is from the same person. Can we work outdoors on a fire station in Pennsylvania since it's considered a life-saving facility?
I'm going to assume that question means working in the construction industry or something like that. I don't know the answer for that for certain, but my gut tells me probably not. The construction industry has pretty much been shut down unless I know there are some procedures in place to request an exemption or a waiver. So if you can make a case that work you're doing at the fire station is integral to the fire station being able to continue their services, there's a possibility on that. But I think my best advice on that would be, before you do that, you may want to check with your legal counsel and make sure that they're comfortable with you doing so. Because as Kristi said, at least the state here in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure in other states, is threatening legal action if they do find you out and violating those mandates.
All right, so next question we have here, with the change to FMLA, if income is paid to individuals who claim this leave, how should pension, 401k contributions, matching, and loans be handled for these wages?
That's a really good question. And unfortunately, I have to defer you back to your plan document because it could vary from one company to another, unless somebody here on the chat knows of something that I'm not aware of. But referring back to plan documents is probably the best place to start.
Okay. And next question here, what about the 4/15 deadline for filing an IRA payment for 2019?
We don't have clear guidance on that yet, but I think logic would say that the IRAs are typically due on the due date of the tax return. So I think it's somewhat safe to assume that date would be extended to July 15 as well. It's a great question, when they haven't given us regulation on, but my gut would say you'll have to July 15. And I don't know, Chad, if you had any other thoughts on that.
No, I was actually just having a conversation with an investment advisor earlier this afternoon on that topic, and neither of us had seen anything. But the only other point I would make is, might not be a better time to buy than right now. Hopefully we're not in the same situation 4 months from now in the market. So keep that in mind too, if you're able to, cash flow wise.
Yeah, and I know this is something we may talk about in a future session, but I'll just throw this out there. One of the things Chad was referring to earlier about tax savings opportunities, it might be a good time to consider a Roth conversion as well. If you have a regular IRA and want to get it into a Roth and get that non-taxable, hopefully it's at a low point now that would minimize those taxes. And that's beyond the scope of what we'll talk about today, but we can elaborate on that if anyone has interest in that.
Okay. Is there a difference between laying off and terminating due to forced closures?
Yeah, so as you think about the return to work, I know it's hard right now to predict when and if the business will return. So at this point, you might have to make a decision that there are some people that you have to indefinitely lay off, and that's okay. You're facing economic hardships at this point in time. You always have the ability to call them back. So your top performers, those are the ones probably you'll call back sooner, and just letting them know that this is hopefully a temporary layoff, but I would caution you to make any firm commitments as to when and if you can bring them back at this point, because we just don't know what's going to happen in the next couple weeks.
Okay. Is the federal government proposing any relief for paying for health insurance coverage for all laid off employees, or just for the ones that would receive paychecks under the relief bill?
That's a good question. Tom, do you remember reading that?
All that I've seen so far is what we kind of talked about in conjunction with the payroll tax credit, that if the employer has to incur health insurance costs to keep the health insurance alive for your affected workers, those that are out of work because of this mandate or because of an impact on the virus, that there will be reimbursement via the payroll credit. Should you lay someone off for reasons over and beyond the the situation at hand, then I think the normal rules would take place. That unfortunately, I mean, I guess as part of a severance package, you can negotiate coverage, but otherwise, they're probably unfortunately going to be looking at COBRA or other means to have that insurance.
Okay. Can we cut pay of the salaried employees and reduce their hours due to tight cash flow?
Yes, you can. I would encourage you to give a letter to employees as to why this is being done related to the COVID-19 virus. One thing too to caution is don't give them a specific date that this may get reinstated. I also think there might be a potential where your cash flow is tight and you're going to ask them to work a little bit more, increased hours and so forth. So letting them know that, that's a possibility until you can get through that cash flow crunch. But sharing as much information as you can without getting too specific, and never use like absolute words such as never, always, things like that. That's what I would caution against using as well.
Okay. If I choose to pay my employees during the mandatory shutdown and my employees typically work overtime on a weekly basis, am I required to pay an average of their hours, or can I pay them for an even 40 hours? I'm
inclined to say you can pay the 40 hours, but you do have to use the regular rate of pay. You can't just use their hourly rate. So I did read that in the regulation. And what the regular pay means is that you're taking basically a weighted average of the compensation that they earned at maybe multiple rates of pay, and using that average as the baseline for that compensation. A clear example is if you're a restaurant, you have an employee doing server work and you also have them doing hostess. Those hourly rates are extremely different. So you have to kind of blend that and use that regular rate of pay, not the specific hourly rates, when calculating that sick pay.
Will Deltek Vision have an update for those who have the payroll modules in order to handle any tax changes?
Ooh, I don't know.
That's one we may have to get back to you on. We will certainly be in the loop with our Deltek team on that. So unless someone here in the group knows the answer to that, but I'm thinking probably not.
All right, I'll send them a reply and just let them know. Maybe we can get an email to follow up on that question.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Any thoughts on if the deadline for making RA contributions for the prior year are going to be pushed to July as well, or will that stay as April 15th?
Yeah, I think that's similar to the question we had before. I think we would certainly have an expectation that will be pushed to July 15. And as soon as we know on that, we can communicate that in our future town halls.
Okay, this one here. I have heard that you can only carry non-active employees on your plan if your plan documents allow it. Kristi said that we should let benefits go through April and either the company can pay or we can seek reimbursement from the employee. Is what Kristi is saying an exception to the normal plan document?
Yeah, I do think there's going to be a little bit of wiggle room, but you want to make sure to touch base with your broker just in case there's other provisions within your plan document that I don't know, because they can vary from company to company. So check with your broker first. And yeah, I think there'll be a little bit of grace with that. I also don't know what other testing you might be subject to as far as having your benefit plans with your audits and so forth. So if you have a resource, an auditor that you work with regularly, you might just want to double check with them as well. It's good to be a little cautious right now and just try to be as thorough, and then document the information you receive just in case you're ever questioned about it going forward.
Mike, I think Katie was proactive there and already got us an answer on the Deltec question from one of our groups. So Katie, you want to give us that answer you got there?
Excellent.
Sure. I was told that yes is the answer. Deltec will update their system for any tax changes as long as you are on the current version.
Okay. This next question here is directed to Phil. Phil, do you have any suggestions for companies that weren't necessarily prepared and remote workers are struggling with speed or connectivity issues due to the volume of people connected? Maybe shifts of people working?
No, absolutely. And it's a good question there because that's always a concern. You know, when you go remote, you don't know what type of internet the individuals have. But I will tell you this, as for working in shifts, if you're have employees work in shifts in order to reduce the amount of bandwidth that's taken up, I would say no. What's happening at the moment is AT&T, Verizon, Comcast. I would suggest that you have your employees that are remote go to their internet service provider, tell them the situation and it's COVID-19 related, and you're now working from home. Those providers will either uncap your bandwidth. So if some people have, say, 25 megabits per second down and 5 up, they may increase it to 50 or 100 for you at no additional cost. So I know for a fact right now Comcast is offering free hotspots, and it's also providing unlimited data to its customers at no extra charge. And they are not disconnecting internet if you are not able to pay on time, and they're not charging late fees because of course they understand the dynamic here. So yes, from home, employees that are working from home, bandwidth is a huge concern, especially when you're connecting back into headquarters from a VPN. So make sure that you have your employees contact their ISP, their internet service provider, and tell them the situation. And there's no guarantee, but I can bet that they will accommodate them and increase their bandwidth.
Okay, next question here is, do we know yet if the 80 hours of emergency sick leave is in addition to current policies or inclusive of sick time that companies may already be offering?
Yeah, it is in addition to what you currently offer, and you can't force employees to take their paid leave that they have available from you as the employer and use that first. You can't require that. So there may be a period of time where employees say, hey, I don't want to use any of my time, and you can't force them. Although unemployment agencies are encouraging employees, use your paid time that's available to you first before claiming unemployment. But yeah, you have to pay that 80 hours up and beyond anything that they currently have within your normal policy.
Okay. Does the statement, the employee is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19 under the Paid Sick Leave Act include the company being forced to close by federal or local government? In this situation, would employees be eligible to this pay, or would unemployment be the option?
Initially, have them file for unemployment because the act or rule is not in place yet. That happens April 2nd. And again, we still need that clarity as to, because it's a federal rule, what does isolation specifically mean? What does quarantine mean? So what Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania had done last night, does that qualify? Does that mean now the company is liable? We're still a little uncertain with the definition, and we hope to get that in the coming days.
It seems this may go 6 to 8 weeks. What are your thoughts on taking a line of credit if we can only sustain 6 weeks of payroll, or do we put people on unemployment now?
Chad or Tom, you want to take that one?
Chad, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think if you have enough work to keep folks going and be productive, I think by all means that would be my first choice. I think just given the relationship morale of your employees and things like that, if they're coming in and you don't have any productive work, I really think at that point you've got to look hard about moving them to unemployment. The other question would just be how significant that line of credit is, and are you going to need that as kind of a stopgap if this thing goes longer than any of us hope for. So there's really a lot of considerations there. And really, I think it depends on how productive your folks can be, and if it makes sense to keep laying out today's dollars for the payroll, or pushing them to unemployment in the hopes that you can get some help with that burden.
Okay, and this question is kind of a follow-up to that. It's, if we get shut down, do you recommend everyone goes on unemployment? Can owners file as well?
There are some limitations as to owners who can file for unemployment. I know specifically S-Corp owners are not allowed to file. I don't know of all the other scenarios. Tom or Chad, maybe you can, put insight into that. I don't know.
Yeah, generally owners cannot collect. There may be some exceptions to that, but I think the general rule is the owner is not able to collect on unemployment benefits.
Well, the other thing I'll add is, with that said, there are talk of changes with self-employed individuals. So I don't know if they would consider an S-Corp owner self-employed, Tom. I mean, this is all still being written and discussed. So I think more to that maybe by next week.
And one,
Go ahead, Kristi.
No, I was going to change it a little bit, but go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there are provisions in the tax credit that there are going to be some relief for self-employed. It's not necessarily unemployment, but there are going to be some benefits there. So, Kristi, go ahead.
Yeah, unemployment is based upon an employee's prior compensation and work history, so length of time that they've been with you. It might carry over to a prior employer, especially if they've been with you less than a year and a half. And there are differences between states too. So if you're a business that operates in both Pennsylvania and Maryland, you could see a significant difference between one or the other. PA is a little more generous than Maryland. Unemployment is determined on where the employee works, not necessarily where they live. So if they live in Pennsylvania, work in Maryland, then they need to file their claim for unemployment in Maryland. Just wanted to share those additional thoughts with you.
And just one last thing, what I'm reading on the S-Corp is the trigger point has often been that they're not actively seeking work because they own the business. Again, I guess my thought is that might relate back to that self-employed person, because that's where they would fail, the S-Corp owner.
Okay, next question here is, would 100% commission salesmen be able to file for unemployment?
I would think so.
Yeah, I don't have anything more to add on that. I would think so as well.
I would think so, because they have compensation that I imagine was reportable with the quarterly unemployment tax returns.
All right, and can spouses of owners collect if they work together at the same company? Owner is 100% owner, spouse is employee.
I would think so, as long as they're not an officer of the company.
Yeah, and again, I think that's another case where it may be a state by state. The state's rules vary from state to state. I think if you have specific questions, instances on that, please, reach out to us and we can research that on the state by state basis.
Let's see. Does the reason an employee is not working, layoff or COVID illness related, matter in terms of benefit to them or recovery for the employer? Are we better off if we just continue to pay them and take the credits against our payroll taxes moving forward?
Well, they definitely are going to receive more compensation if you pay them at their full rate, because unemployment is usually 2/3 or less of what they normally make. So for that reason, yeah, it's more advantageous for them in that way. But again, how long can you sustain that as a business? How does that affect your cash and so forth? That's going to vary from one company to the other. And I do know when you're filing your initial claim for unemployment, at this time, it does not give you an option to select anything about COVID, right? So employees are just going to have to mark down one of the traditional reasons, lack of work being probably the most common related to this scenario.
Do we know what the hardship qualifications for business less than 50 staff members are?
Yeah, that guidance has not been presented yet. When the bill was passed late Wednesday evening, it was with the caveat that guidance would be forthcoming. We haven't seen that yet, and I know with the Senate and the House kind of concentrating on this next stimulus act, that may have their attention. I would suspect before it goes into play on April 2nd that we'll have guidance, and a good example of that is when the tax filing deadline was extended last Friday. I think it took until Tuesday of this week till the IRS issued notice 2020-17, which gave us all the particulars on that. In that interim period, we didn't know if estimated tax payments were included or they weren't, and that gave us some clarity on that. So yeah, stay tuned, and these are the type of topics we'll certainly be updating you on as we keep holding these sessions from week to week.
Okay, next one here is, does the FMLA apply to someone who is not exposed to the virus but has serious health issues that, based upon their doctor's recommendations, the caregiver isolate him or herself?
I'm pulling the document right here. I do apologize. And if one of my colleagues has it faster and wants to answer it. What it says here is that need to care for a minor child whose school or place of childcare has been closed or is unavailable due to the public health emergency. It says the new act removes the expansion of FMLA for illnesses related. So if it already qualifies based under the existing original FMLA rule, then I think they're okay. But if it's something outside of that, I don't know that it would be covered. Anybody else want to respond, Tom?
Well, yeah, the only thing I would add to that, Kristi, is, as most of you on the call probably know, the existing Family Medical Leave Act provisions really just require you to keep the employee's job available for 12 weeks to maintain health insurance coverage and so on, but it doesn't require that you pay them any salary in this point. In this case, it does require the payment of salary for 10 weeks if they meet the criteria related to the COVID-19 virus. So I think that would be a determining factor. Is the reason for their being off work directly related to COVID-19, or is it a pre-existing condition? Family medical leave is still going to apply. It's just a matter, do you have to pay them or not?
Yeah, and with the new expansion, there might be an exception given to companies that have less than 25 employees. So I'm not sure where your organization lies, but that's one thing to keep in mind. But if this is related to COVID, the expansion and so forth, then you need to protect their position.
Okay, next question here is, sorry for the repeat, but I've been directed to advise our EEs who have reduced hours and don't want to use PTO to file UC. Since we are not furloughing, suggestions for sharing that message, please?
Can you repeat that, Mike?
Mm-hmm. I've been directed to advise our employees who have reduced hours and don't want to use PTO to file UC. Since we are not furloughing, suggestions for sharing that message.
Yeah, letting them know it's to their advantage to file an unemployment claim, just to best prepare them for when and if they have to, claim. I'm sorry, I'm struggling a little bit off the top of my head. Anybody else have a suggestion on how to word that? Katie, maybe?
I don't. I think at the end of the day, I mean, it's really up to the employer how they want to handle it. They're always welcome to be more generous if they want to. I don't know.
Let's see. Next question here. Can you clarify if a staff member is furloughed so they can collect unemployment, can we keep them on our company health plan?
Yes, for the time being, there's going to be a point where your carrier is going to demand that you move them to COBRA because they no longer meet the eligibility requirements as far as the minimum hours they have to work. That would be defined in your plan document. A lot of times in the past, it's been pretty immediate. When they fall below that threshold, you have to move them to COBRA. It's all part of the Affordable Care Act and so forth. But again, indication is that carriers are going to be a little bit more lenient in this time, so you can keep them on your plan just a little bit longer. And again, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out, we're going to have a better understanding as to how long this might last and what those implications are going to be to our organization. So this will certainly be one of the topics that we cover in our future town halls weekly as we continue to move forward. Michael, you're on mute.
Oh, look at that. I did it to myself again. Can you please summarize again the process to receive reimbursement tax credits for the sick pay and FMLA benefits?
Sure.
Tom?
Sure. Yes. If you pay the wages under those provisions, under the sick leave and the FMLA, obviously we need to track that. As Kristi said, we need to track that time separately. The first thing is when you pay that, you will withhold the Social Security and Medicare from the employee as you normally would and all the other taxes. You will remit only the Medicare piece of that when you send your 941 deposit in. You do not have to remit the Social Security piece. But then when you file the upcoming Form 941, the federal payroll tax return, you will be able to claim a credit against the employer's share of the Social Security tax. And that would be for the wages that were paid prior to this type or for your normal wages to the extent of your credit. Now your credit's going to be all of those wages you paid plus that Medicare you paid in. If the total of all that, your credit exceeds the tax liability, you'll be able to make a choice, either apply that to future quarters or what many people I'm sure will do is ask for a refund of the excess.
Yeah, and some companies might be in a position where there is excess, so they will be able to, get a refund check issued to them.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing we don't know is how long it'll take Treasury to process that refund request, but hopefully they will be expediting that.
Right. Mike, you're on mute again.
Oh, man. What have you heard about the opportunity for 4 months of expenses being reimbursed if we leave all full-time employees on the payroll?
I haven't heard anything about that. It was all related to the payroll tax.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything on that.
Okay. Will the SBA loans require personal guarantees?
Chad, anything you've read on that? You may not know the answer to that.
I haven't gone through the full application, but none of the bullet point summaries that I'm seeing mention personal guarantees. I mean, there's some things to, that income thresholds, other thresholds, you have to prove, but I don't see a requirement of a personal guarantee listed on what I could see on the front end without going through an application.
Okay, next one on here. Am I interpreting this correctly? If we previously didn't have sick leave pay, this new law requires us to now provide 80 hours of sick pay to eligible employees.
Yes, effective April 2nd, if you have less than 500 employees, you would be required to provide that emergency sick pay unless you can qualify for the exemption based upon hardship. We just don't know yet what is the criteria for you to qualify for that exemption if you have less than 50 employees. So stay tuned, more information as it becomes available, we'll share that with you.
Mike, I'm getting word here that we still have quite a few questions to go and that we are running a little bit short on time here. Why don't we go to about 5:30 yet and get all the questions in that we can? And then at that point, any that we don't get to, we'll either answer by email or we'll hold those for our next session next week. I know we said earlier that we would try to get them all answered today, but we appreciate the questions you're answering. Your great response here today, and we appreciate that.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, we'll
Mike,
mix it around.
Can I just add on the personal guarantee? It looks like if you own more than 20% of the company, they may require a personal guarantee on the SBA loans. And I don't know if the round 3 is going to remove any of these requirements, but more than 20% ownership guarantee would be required.
Okay, and I'll actually pick out a question that kind of ties into that. I guess it says, what are the income thresholds for the SBA loan?
Chad, you're on mute.
Yeah, currently what I'm seeing is less than $7.5 million in revenue in the last 3 years, under $5 million net income. And now again, that's today. That may change by Monday.
Okay, next one on here. If we are paying sick leave under this plan, can we still deduct employees' share of health insurance from that pay?
Yes, to my knowledge, you would still withhold as you normally do. And then I think it's only the employer portion that they could potentially get a credit for. Is that true, Tom?
That is correct. Now, I think if you would happen to shift and pick up some of the employee burden that you normally would pay, and the employer absorbs that cost, that may be eligible for the credit.
Yeah.
Okay. Are reported tips included in earning to determine unemployment benefit payment amounts?
Yes.
Okay. We need to lay off.
They were reported. And they weren't just cash under the table.
Next one here. We need to lay off a few people. Do we owe their earned PTO to them?
I guess the question remains, do you expect to call them back within a reasonable time, meaning less than 30 days? If you don't have a good feeling, then I would encourage you to point back to your handbook and what that says as far as the employee no longer working for you and not being active. If that's not defined, now you have an opportunity to make a new policy.
Okay. Can you speak to the 2 pay rates for this special sick leave, February 3rd, or what's it, 2/3, $511, and 2/3, $200 caps?
Tom, do you want that one?
Sure. Yeah, there are 2 caps under the program, and I'm going to actually jump up here in my notes so I don't misspeak on that. The $511 cap pertains to if any of these conditions are what the triggering event is. Self-isolation, diagnosis or care, or a health care provider's recommendation. Then it is capped at $511 per day per employee. Under the emergency sick leave, that's obviously for 10 days, maximum pay of $5,110. The $200 cap pertains to if you're caring for a family member exposed to or diagnosed with the virus, or for care of a child under 18 whose school or daycare is closed. I think the wild card there that we're still trying to determine is the one that came up in a previous question, is a state mandated closing such as we have in a number of states right now. Does that fall into the isolation? Our gut would say yes. People don't have the ability to work, but we do need some clarity on that.
Okay. For someone who is taking qualifying leave to care for a family member who is sick or quarantined, or to care for children if school or daycare is closed, is a requirement to pay both the 2-week sick pay and the expanded FMLA 10-week pay?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Again, remembering those provisions are for employers with 500 or less employees, with potential hardship waivers being obtained by those with 50 or fewer. I guess if you're in that 51 to 499 range, it's a definite yes.
Okay. Do I have to post the federal notice if I have more than 500 employees?
I don't think it would hurt. Just so people are aware why it doesn't apply. You can lean back on the Fed saying, hey, this was their rule and we're complying with it. And unless Katie or somebody feels that there's a reason not to post it, I think education is always a good thing.
I would agree.
Let's see. Next one here. I think this kind of is a general one anybody could really answer, is who defines needed isolation, staff member or their doctor? I don't know if that's been stated.
Doctor.
Okay. And now we're running up on the last minute here, and I saw a couple of the questions in here are about a recording. The live event is being recorded, and I'm sure our marketing team will be getting that uploaded and sent out.
It may take a little bit of time, so it wouldn't be immediately that the recording will be available, but we'll let you know as soon as it is, because there's like a processing time frame.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, well, Mike, why don't you give us 1 or 2 more and then we'll wrap it up here.
All right. So if not able to work in any situation and we are caught, what are the penalties? Will crew memberships be in trouble or just ownership?
What I have read on that topic is, again, that's going to be enforced jurisdiction by jurisdiction. That could be at the state level, that could be at the city level, such as what I think San Francisco was kind of out ahead of the state of California. Now the state of California has put in. So it will differ, but at least what I've read is the penalties can be kind of harsh. They could be, I think they're going to start obviously with the employer. But professional licenses could be pulled, the ability to get funding, the ability to take advantage of these programs could be in place. I haven't read something where they will specifically go after employees, but I'm not going to make any sort of guarantee that they would not. I think if an order is in place in your jurisdiction, you defy it, you're taking a very, very significant risk not only from a legal and financial aspect, but also potentially putting your employees in harm's way.
Okay. And if our doors are locked, but one individual is inside, are we technically closed?
Again, I would look jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but what was put in place here in Pennsylvania, if you read it verbatim, it basically says stay off the premises. But, you know, I'm sure everyone will use their own judgment. I mean, certainly there are things you may have to come by to pick up mail. You may have to cut a check. There's things that just have to be done. I would hope that law enforcement would give a little bit of leniency on that, but we all know how that is. 2 miles over the speed limit's breaking the law, but will they hit you for that? So, okay, well, again, we really thank everyone. We're overwhelmed by the number of questions. We really appreciate that. We really appreciate you all jumping on with us today. Remember, the Stambaugh Ness communication lines will remain open. Call or email your Stambaugh Ness rep at any time. We are going to be working. We're going to be working from our remote environment. We're certainly going to be keeping our eyes and ears open on everything that develops in all these topics. And as such, we do have our next town hall scheduled for next Wednesday, March 25th at 2 o'clock Eastern time. But anything that comes up in the meantime, we will be sending out via our email blast, via our websites, via our social media channels. And if something comes up that is of extreme importance, we will pull together another one of these sessions very quickly, as we did today. So again, we thank you all. I thank my team here. You all done a great job doing yeoman's work over the last few days, staying on top of this. And last but certainly not least is we hope you all stay safe and we all get through this together as quickly as possible. Thank you.